They say silence is golden, but the silence that fell over that courtroom when I walked in, that was terror. That was recognition. That was 30 years of lies collapsing in real time. My son, my own son, had told everyone I was nobody, a deadbeat, a failure, who abandoned him. My daughter-in-law had built her entire identity around being the woman who rescued him from me. And the judge? Well, the judge knew exactly who I was. He'd served under me. He remembered. What they didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this exact moment for 3 decades, not out of revenge, but because some truths can only be spoken when everyone is finally forced to listen. And I need you to understand something right from the start. This isn't a story about redemption. It's not about a father and son reuniting in some tearful embrace while violins play in the background. Real life doesn't work like that. Real love doesn't always look like the movies. Sometimes real love looks like disappearing. Sometimes it looks like letting the people you die for believe the worst about you. Sometimes it looks like walking into a courtroom 3 decades later and watching everything they thought they knew shatter like glass on concrete. So why am I telling you this? Why does this matter to you? Because I'm willing to bet you've been taught the same lie I was taught. That love means showing up, that good parents never leave, that if you really care about someone, you fight to stay in their life no matter what. And maybe that's true most of the time. But what happens when your presence, no matter how pure your intentions, becomes the thing that's hurting them most? What happens when the most loving thing you can do is become the villain in their story? Nobody talks about that. Nobody prepares you for the day when a therapist looks you in the eye and tells you that your child is having psychological breaks. And the common thread in every episode is you. Not because you're abusive, not because you're neglectful, but because the trauma they experienced has attached itself to your face, your voice, your existence. And the only way they can heal is if you're not there. What do you do with that information? How do you love someone who needs you to disappear? And this video is going to challenge everything you think you know about love, about sacrifice, about what it means to be a good person. Because we live in a culture that worships visibility. Everyone's got to have a platform, a voice, a story. Everyone's got to show up and be seen and make sure people know who they really are. But what if the deepest form of love is the kind nobody ever witnesses? What if the truest version of strength is the kind that never gets recognized? I'm going to tell you about 30 years of chosen invisibility, about what it costs to let your own child believe you're worthless, about the difference between sacrifice and surrender, between hiding and strategic silence. And I'm going to tell you about the day all that silence ended, not because I wanted vindication, but because sometimes truth has its own timeline, and when it surfaces, all you can do is stand there and let it happen. If you've ever been misunderstood and chosen not to correct the record, if you've ever loved someone enough to let them hate you, if you've ever carried a truth so heavy you thought it might crush you, this is for you. And if you've never experienced any of that, this is still for you, because someday you will. Someday you'll face an impossible choice between being seen and being loving. And when that day comes, I want you to have a framework for it that doesn't destroy you. So let me take you back. Let me show you how this started, because it didn't start in that courtroom. It started on a Tuesday night in April, 29 years ago, when my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. and my ex-wife's voice came through the speaker sounding like something broken. She hadn't called me in 2 years. We'd been divorced for 5, and the custody arrangement was clean. She had our son. I had visitation rights I rarely used because every time I showed up, he got worse. I didn't understand it then. I thought I was doing something wrong, saying the wrong things, pushing too hard. I'd hired a therapist for him, paid for the sessions, drove him there myself. And every session seemed to help until I walked in the room. Then he'd shut down. His eyes would go distant. He'd start rocking a little bit, this unconscious movement like he was trying to self-soothe. The therapist suggested we do sessions without me. I agreed. They got better. He started talking, started processing, and I started to see the pattern I didn't want to see. So when my ex-wife called that night, voice shaking, I already knew what she was going to say before she said it. "He's in the hospital," she told me. "He had an episode at school, started screaming that someone was coming to get him. They had to sedate him." I asked her what I could do, and there was this pause, this long, terrible pause where I could hear her breathing, and I could hear something else underneath it. Years of resentment, years of blame, but also something softer, something like grief. "The doctors want to talk to you," she said. They think you need to hear this directly." I met them the next morning. 2 doctors and the therapist I'd been paying for 2 years. They sat me down in one of those conference rooms with fluorescent lights that make everything look sick, and they explained to me, very gently, very carefully, that my son had complex PTSD, that the trauma wasn't my fault, but I'd been there when it happened. And the car accident when he was 4, I'd been driving. We'd been hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. My son had been in the back seat. He was physically fine, not a scratch on him. But something in his brain had wired the fear, the impact, the sound of metal crunching to me, to the sound of my voice saying his name, to the smell of my cologne, to the shape of my hands on the steering wheel. "It's not rational," the therapist said. "Trauma isn't rational. He knows intellectually that you didn't cause the accident, but his nervous system doesn't know that. Every time he sees you, his body goes into fight or flight. Every time he hears your voice, his brain tells him he's in danger." I asked them what we do, how we fix it. And that's when the therapist said the thing that changed everything. "Right now," she said, "he's created a protective narrative. In his mind, you're the source of danger. He's made you the villain because that gives him a sense of control. If you're bad, if you abandoned him, if you're the problem, then he can keep you away and feel safe. But if you're good, if you love him, if you keep trying to be in his life, his brain short circuits. He can't reconcile the fear response with the reality of who you are. So he breaks." She leaned forward. I remember her hands were folded on the table. I remember she had a small scar on her thumb. "If you love him," she said, "you need to let him be right. You need to let him believe you're the bad guy. You need to step back so completely that he doesn't have to reconcile anything. You need to become the absence, the thing he escaped from, because that narrative, as painful as it is what's keeping him functional right now." I asked her for how long. She said she didn't know. Maybe a few years, maybe forever. And I sat there in that fluorescent light, in that conference room that smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. And I understood that I had a choice to make. I could fight for my right to be in his life. I could insist on visitation, on being understood, on correcting the narrative. I could bring in other doctors, get second opinions, make the case that there had to be another way. Or I could love him more than I loved being his father. Let me say that again because it's important. I could love him more than I loved being his father. Those are different things. Being his father was about me, about my identity, my role, my rights. Loving him was about him, about what he needed, even if what he needed was for me to disappear. I made the choice in that room. I didn't go see him in the hospital. I didn't say goodbye. I just started the process of becoming a ghost. First, I stopped using my visitation rights. Then I stopped calling. I sent child support every month, exactly on time, never missed a payment. But I removed my name from it, had it come from a lawyer's trust account, so he wouldn't see my signature. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number. When mutual friends asked about him, I kept my answers vague. "He's doing well, I think. You'd have to ask his mother." And slowly, over months and then years, I became the story she needed me to be, the deadbeat, The man who walked away. The father who didn't care enough to stay. I didn't correct anyone. Not once. Not ever. But here's what I did do. Here's what nobody knew. I kept track of everything. Every report card. I had a friend who worked in the school district send me copies. Every soccer game. I sat in my car 3 blocks away and listened on a radio app that broadcast local sports. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. I documented it, not because I thought I'd ever show him, but because I needed proof for myself that he was real, that this wasn't just a story I'd made up, that I'd had a son once and I'd loved him enough to let him go. I also made sure he was taken care of in ways he'd never trace back to me. His college debt? I paid it through an anonymous alumni donor program. His first business needed office space. I bought the building through a shell corporation and made sure his rent was 40% below market rate. When his mother got sick and couldn't afford treatment, I created a charity fund that selected her as a recipient. I was the invisible hand in his life, the ghost benefactor. And it nearly killed me. You want to know what that kind of invisibility costs? It costs you your identity. Because everything we are is relational. We know ourselves through our connections to other people. I am a father. I am a son. I am a friend. But when you remove the connections, what's left? I had to figure out who I was when nobody knew me. When there was no role to play, no relationship to maintain. Just me and the silence and the choice I'd made. Some nights I'd sit in my apartment and I'd take out the letters I'd written him, dozens of them, hundreds eventually, letters I'd never send. Dear son, you turned 16 today, man. I wonder if you're learning to drive. I hope you're not scared. I hope someone patient is teaching you. Dear son, I heard you made varsity. I'm proud of you. I'm so proud I could burst. I kept them in a fireproof safe. Not because I planned to give them to him someday, but because I needed to know the truth still existed somewhere, that I hadn't made it all up, that I'd been a father once, even if I couldn't be one anymore. And the discipline it took to maintain that silence, my God, every instinct in me wanted to break it, wanted to show up at his graduation, at his wedding, wanted to reach out and say, I'm here, I've always been here, you just couldn't see me. But I didn't. Because the therapist's words stayed with me. If you love him, let him be right. So I let him be right. I let him tell people I'd abandoned him. I let his mother tell people I was worthless. And when he met the woman who would become his wife, I let her believe she was rescuing him from a childhood of neglect. I became so good at being invisible that I almost disappeared from my own life. But I didn't disappear completely, because I held on to one thing. One non-negotiable truth that I refused to let go of, no matter how deep into the silence I went. I kept my military records. See, nobody in my son's life knew this, but before he was born, I'd served. 22 years in the Marine Corps, I'd worked my way up from enlisted to officer. I'd done 2 tours in the Gulf. I'd led men through situations where the margin between life and death was about 6 inches and half a second. I'd been decorated, commended. I'd saved lives. I'd made decisions that mattered. And when I left the service to be a full-time father, to try to have a normal life, I packed all of that away. The medals went in a box. The commendations went in a file. I didn't talk about it, didn't identify with it. I wanted to be just a dad, just a regular person living a regular life. But when I made myself invisible, when I let my son erase me from his story, I took those records back out, not to show anyone, not to prove anything, but to remind myself, you are not nobody. You have been someone. You have done things that mattered. This silence you're choosing, it's not weakness, it's strategy, it's what you were trained for. Submarines run silent. That's what they taught us. When you're in enemy waters, you don't make noise. You don't announce yourself. You go deep, you stay quiet, and you wait for the right moment. I was in enemy waters.
The enemy was my son's trauma, and the only way to win was to disappear so completely that the trauma had nothing to attach to. So that's what I did for 30 years, and I thought that's how it would end. I thought I'd die one day, probably alone, probably without him ever knowing who I really was. I'd made peace with that. Or I thought I had, but then my ex-wife died. Suddenly, aneurysm. She was 62 and healthy, and then she just wasn't. And when someone dies, the legal system starts asking questions. Questions about assets, about inheritance, about next of kin. She'd remarried years ago. Her second husband had died 5 years before her. And in her will, she'd left everything to our son. But everything turned out to be complicated because some of the assets weren't actually hers.
The building where my son's business operated, that was listed in a corporate name, but the corporation had my fingerprints all over it if anyone looked closely enough. The trust that had paid his college debt, same thing. The charity fund that had covered his mother's medical bills, that one I'd been sloppy with. My name was in the paperwork, buried, but there. And when the estate lawyers started doing their due diligence, they found connections they couldn't explain. Money flowing from sources that didn't make sense, property owned by entities that traced back to a name that should have been irrelevant, mine. So they filed questions with the court, requested documentation, asked for clarification on certain assets, and my son, who was trying to settle his mother's estate, had to respond. That's when he hired his own lawyer. And that's when his lawyer started pulling threads, started asking, who is William Caldwell, and why is his name attached to half of your mother's financial history? My son didn't know. He literally didn't know who I was anymore. He'd been 4 when the accident happened, 8 when I disappeared completely. He was 38 now. I was a vague memory, a cautionary tale, the man who'd left. But his lawyer was thorough. And when you start pulling on threads in someone's financial life, eventually you get to the military records, because veterans' benefits leave paper trails, property tax, exemptions for disabled vets leave paper trails. And when the lawyer pulled my DD-214, my discharge papers, my service record, suddenly everything looked different. Suddenly the deadbeat dad was a decorated Marine Corps officer. Suddenly the man who'd abandoned his son had a history of service and sacrifice that didn't match the story at all. The lawyer brought this to my son. I wasn't there for this conversation, but I heard about it later. I heard that my son didn't believe it at first, said it had to be a different William Caldwell, said his father was nobody, had done nothing, was nothing. But the lawyer showed him the birth certificate, the marriage license, the divorce papers, all with my service record attached, all with my rank. Major William Caldwell, USMC, retired. And my son apparently just sat there, didn't say anything, just sat there staring at papers that told him a story completely different from the one he'd been living. His wife, my daughter-in-law, though we'd never met, she was the one who said, well, he's probably just lying on his military records too, stolen valor or whatever. And that's when the lawyer said, Ma'am, you can't fake a DD-214. These are federal documents. And I made some calls. Major Caldwell was, well, he's known. In certain circles, he's very known. The lawyer arranged for a hearing, a formal proceeding to sort out the estate questions, to clarify the assets, to determine what belonged to whom. And he filed a motion requiring my presence, not requesting, requiring. I got the notice on a Wednesday. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. I had 5 days to decide whether to show up or to disappear one more time. And for the first time in 30 years, disappearing wasn't an option, because the assets in question, they were designed to take care of my son. The building, the trusts, the funds. All of it was meant to support him without him knowing, but if I didn't show up to clarify ownership, the court might freeze them, might liquidate them, might make decisions that would hurt him financially. The silence that had protected him for 30 years was about to hurt him. And I couldn't let that happen, so I decided to surface. Not for vindication, not to prove I'd been the good guy all along, but because the mission required it. Because love sometimes looks like silence, but sometimes it looks like stepping into the light, even when the light is the last place you want to be. I bought a suit. First one I'd owned in a decade. I drove to the courthouse in the city where my son now lived, the city I'd been avoiding for 30 years. I parked 3 blocks away because I didn't trust myself not to turn around if I parked any closer, and I walked up those courthouse steps feeling like I was heading into combat, because in a way I was. The enemy was the story, the narrative my son had built his entire adult life on, and I was about to blow it up. The courtroom was one of those old ones, wood paneling and high ceilings, and the kind of formal atmosphere that makes you feel like history is watching. I stood outside the double doors for a full minute, just breathing, just trying to center myself, trying to remember why I was doing this, for him, for his future, for the truth that was bigger than my comfort. I opened the doors, and I want you to understand the specific quality of what happened next, because it's important. It wasn't dramatic in the movie sense. Nobody gasped, nobody stood up. It was subtler than that, more devastating. I walked in, and the first person who saw me was my daughter-in-law. She was sitting in the gallery, scrolling on her phone, half paying attention to the proceedings, and when I walked past her, she glanced up with that casual disinterest you give to strangers. But then she looked again, and her face did this thing, this flicker of confusion, like she almost recognized me but couldn't place from where. She giggled, literally giggled, leaned over to my son and whispered something, probably something like, "That guy looks like he got lost on the way to a military funeral." I saw her smirk. My son turned to look, and when his eyes met mine, everything in his body went still. He didn't recognize me, not consciously, but something in him knew, something deeper than memory. His hand gripped the armrest of the bench. His head started to shake, just slightly. This unconscious, no. I kept walking toward the front of the courtroom where the lawyers were standing, and that's when the judge looked up from his paperwork. Judge Harold Morrison. I'd known him as Lieutenant Morrison 35 years ago. He'd served under me in my second tour. Good kid, smart, wanted to be a lawyer when he got out, and I'd written him a recommendation for law school. I'd lost track of him after that, didn't know he'd ended up here. In this city, in this courtroom, he looked at me and his face went white. Actually white. I watched the color drain from his skin like someone had pulled a plug. His hand, holding a pen, started shaking. He dropped the pen. It clattered on the desk, loud in the sudden silence. "My God," he said. And the microphone on the bench caught it, amplified it, sent it echoing around the room. "Is that really him?" Everyone turned. The lawyers turned, the clerk turned, my son fully turned in his seat, and now he was staring at me with this look I'd seen before, back when he was small and something had confused him so badly his brain couldn't process it. My daughter-in-law stopped giggling. The judge stood up. "Major Caldwell." His voice cracked on my name. "Sir, is that you?" I nodded. "Hello, Harry." You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, I think someone did drop a pen somewhere in the back, because there was this tiny sound that seemed massive in the silence. The judge looked at the lawyers. "Did you know who you were summoning?" My son's lawyer, a young guy in an expensive suit, said, "Your Honor, this is William Caldwell, the respondent in the estate matter." "This is Major William Caldwell," the judge said, and there was something in his voice, or disbelief. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" The lawyer clearly didn't. Neither did my son. Neither did my daughter-in-law, though she'd stopped smirking and started looking nervous. The judge sat back down slowly, like his legs weren't quite working right. "Someone get me his service record. Someone get me—" He stopped himself, looked at me. "Sir, I apologize. This is highly irregular, but you should know that your son is in this courtroom." "I know," I said quietly. "Does he know who you are?" "No," I said. He doesn't." And I turned to look at my son, really look at him, for the first time in 30 years. He was tall, taller than I had expected. He had his mother's eyes. He had my hands. He was staring at me like I was a ghost, which I suppose I was. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my eyes on my son, "I'm not here to disrupt these proceedings. I'm here because my presence was required to clarify certain assets in the estate. I can provide that clarification and then leave if that's easier for everyone." The judge shook his head. "Major, I don't think anything about this is going to be easy." He was right about that. The hearing that was supposed to take 30 minutes took 4 hours. My son's lawyer kept asking questions, and I kept answering them, and with every answer the story got more complicated. Yes, I owned the building through a holding company. Yes, I'd structured it that way deliberately so my son wouldn't know. Yes, Wayne, I'd kept his rent below market rate. Yes, I'd set up the scholarship fund that paid his college debt. Yes, I'd created the medical charity that covered his mother's treatment. "Why?" the lawyer kept asking. "If you're his father, why all the secrecy? Why not just help him directly?" And I didn't know how to explain it in a way that would make sense to someone who hadn't lived it. How do you explain to a room full of strangers that sometimes love looks like absence, that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them believe you don't care? I tried. I said, "My son needed me to not be in his life for medical reasons, psychological reasons. This was how I could still take care of him without violating that need." The lawyer looked skeptical. My daughter-in-law whispered something to my son that I couldn't hear. My son just sat there, silent, staring at me with this look I couldn't read. But the judge understood. I could see it in his face. He'd served in combat. He knew about impossible choices. He knew about doing the hard thing even when the hard thing looks like the wrong thing to everyone else. "For the record," the judge said quietly, "Major Caldwell was awarded the Silver Star for actions in combat that saved the lives of 14 men, including mine. He is one of the most decorated officers of his generation. And if he says he had reasons for his choices, I'm inclined to believe those reasons were sound." My son stood up. Just stood up in the middle of the hearing, which you're not supposed to do. "I need a recess," he said. His voice sounded strange, tight. "I need a minute." The judge granted it. My son walked out of the courtroom. His wife followed him, and I sat there in the witness box feeling like I'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of his life, which I had. There's no other way to describe it. The judge called a 15-minute recess. I stepped down from the witness box, and one of the bailiffs, an older guy who looked like he'd seen some things, came over to me. "Major Caldwell," he said. "I serve too, different branch, but I know the name. It's an honor, sir." I thanked him. Didn't know what else to say. I wasn't feeling very honorable. I was feeling like a man who'd just walked into his son's life and shattered everything he thought he knew. My son came back after 20 minutes, not 15. His eyes were red. His wife was with him, but she wasn't smirking anymore. She looked shaken. I wondered what he'd told her. I wondered if he'd told her anything, or if he was still trying to process it himself. When the hearing resumed, the judge asked my son if he had any questions for me. "Legal questions," he clarified, "about the estate." My son said, "No, Your Honor. I just want to understand, why did you leave?" I say it wasn't a legal question. The judge should have shut it down. But he didn't. He just looked at me and waited. And I had a choice in that moment. I could tell the truth, the whole truth about the accident and the trauma and the therapist's recommendation. I could explain everything. Or I could protect him one more time. Protect him from the weight of knowing that his entire narrative, his entire understanding of his childhood was built on a therapeutic strategy that maybe wasn't even right. I chose protection. Again. I left because I thought it was best for you, I said. I thought you'd be better off without me, and maybe I was wrong. Maybe I made the wrong call, but I made it out of love, and I've spent 30 years trying to take care of you, in the only way I knew how. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a truth, and it was one he could live with. He nodded slowly, didn't say anything else, just nodded and sat back down. The judge wrapped up the hearing. He ruled that the assets were mine, but that I could do with them as I pleased, including transferring them to my son if that was my intent. I said it was. He made it official. And just like that, the legal part was done. But the real part, the part where my son and I had to figure out what came next, that was just beginning. After the hearing, I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. I didn't know if I should leave or wait or what. I felt untethered. For 30 years I'd known exactly what my role was, invisible. But now I was visible, and I had no idea how to be that. My son came out. Alone. His wife had gone ahead to get the car, or maybe she just needed space. He stood about 10 feet away from me, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. "I don't know what to say to you," he said finally. "You don't have to say anything. I spent my whole life thinking you didn't care, that you just walked away and never looked back. I know. And now I find out you've been, what, watching me? Helping me for 30 years? Yes." He looked up at me. "That's really messed up. You know that, right? That's really, really messed up." "I know," I said, because it was. There was no defending it. It was messed up and complicated and painful, and it was the best I could do with the hand I'd been dealt. "The judge called you a hero," he said. "The judge is being generous." "Are you? A hero?" "I'm just a man who made some hard choices. Some of them were right. Some of them probably weren't. But they were all made with you in mind." He nodded, looked at the floor again. "I need time to process this, to figure out what it means. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, or I'm going wherever you need me to go, whatever helps you." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's the thing, isn't it? You'll disappear again if that's what I need. You'll do whatever I need, even if what I need is for you to not exist." "Yes," I said simply, because it was true. He shook his head. "I don't know if that's the most selfless thing I've ever heard, or the most cowardly." "Probably both," I admitted. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face shift. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but maybe the beginning of curiosity. The beginning of wondering if the story he'd been telling himself had holes in it. "I'll call you," he said. "Maybe. I don't know. But I have your number now. The lawyer gave it to me, so I'll think about it." "Okay," I said. And then he left. Walked down the hallway and out the door and into his life that was completely different now than it had been 4 hours ago. And I stood there in that courthouse hallway, feeling like I'd just surfaced from 30 years underwater. My lungs hurt, my eyes hurt from the light. Everything felt too bright, too loud, too much. But I'd done it. I'd surfaced, not because I wanted to, but because the mission required it. And now I had to figure out how to live in the light again. So let me tell you what I've learned from all this. Let me tell you what 30 years of invisibility and 1 day of exposure taught me about love and sacrifice and truth. First lesson, love is not always recognition. We've been sold this idea that if someone really loves you, they'll fight to be in your life, they'll show up, they'll make you see them, they'll demand space in your world. And for a lot of relationships, that's true, that's right. But not all of them, not always. Sometimes love is releasing your grip on someone's narrative. Sometimes it's stepping back so far that you disappear completely, not because you don't care, but because you care so much that your ego becomes irrelevant. My son needed me to be absent. His healing depended on it. And if I'd insisted on staying visible, if I'd demanded my right to be understood, I would have chosen my need for recognition over his need for peace. That would have been ego. That would have been about me. Instead, I chose invisibility. I chose to let him believe the worst about me. And I did it consciously. I did it knowing exactly what it would cost. That's the key, conscious invisibility. Because most people who disappear from their kids' lives aren't making a conscious choice. They're just running away from pain or responsibility or the hard work of being present. That's not love, that's cowardice. But when you consciously choose absence because presence would cause harm, that's different, that's sacrifice. How do you know the difference? How do you know if you're sacrificing or just hiding? Here's the test. If your child called tomorrow and said, "I need you," would you come? Would you drop everything and show up? No questions asked. For 30 years, my answer was always yes. Always. If he'd needed me, I would have been there in 6 hours or less, no matter where I was. I kept a bag packed. I kept my phone charged. I kept myself ready. That's how I knew it was sacrifice and not surrender. Because I wasn't running away. I was standing guard from a distance. I was the invisible sentry, the ghost in the watchtower, ready to move the second I was needed. If you're truly sacrificing for someone, you're still present. Just not visible, you're still engaged, just not acknowledged. And you're ready to surface the moment the mission requires it. If you're just hiding, you're not ready for anything. You're numb, you're checked out, you've convinced yourself you don't care, because caring hurts too much. Know the difference, feel the difference. Second lesson, sacrifice has intention, surrender has exhaustion. They look the same from the outside. Both involve giving up, both involve stepping back, both involve letting go. But internally, they're completely different. Sacrifice says, "This hurts, and I'm choosing it anyway because the alternative hurts someone else more." Surrender says, "This hurts, and I'm too tired to do anything else." Sacrifice is active. It's a decision you make every single day. Every morning I woke up and chose invisibility again, chose silence again, chose to let him believe I didn't care. That was a choice, an active, conscious, deliberate choice. Surrender is passive. It's what happens when you run out of options and energy and just collapse into whatever's easiest. I almost surrendered multiple times. There were years, especially years 7 through 12, of the invisibility where I was so tired, so lonely, so desperate to just give up and either force my way back into his life or disappear so completely I wouldn't have to think about him anymore. Those were the dangerous years, the years where I questioned everything, where I wondered if the therapist had been wrong, where I fantasized about showing up at his door with all the letters I'd written and just dumping the truth on him whether he was ready or not. But I didn't, because every time I got close to surrender, I forced myself to ask, is this about him or about me? Am I thinking about surfacing because he needs me to or because I need him to see me? And every time the honest answer was, it's about me. I need recognition. I need validation. I need him to know I'm not the villain. So I stayed down, stayed silent, because sacrifice doesn't get to ask for recognition. The moment you need someone to see your sacrifice, It stops being sacrifice and becomes performance. Third lesson, you can let people rewrite who you are in their story without losing yourself. This is the tricky one, because we're taught that if you let people misunderstand you, you're being inauthentic. You're lying by omission, you're betraying yourself, but that's not true, or it doesn't have to be. I let my son believe I was a deadbeat. I let him tell people I'd abandoned him. I let my daughter-in-law build her entire identity around being the woman who rescued him from my neglect. I let all of that happen without correction. But I never believed it myself. I never internalized their narrative. I never looked in the mirror and saw the man they described. I knew who I was. I had proof. I had my service records. I had my medals. I had the letters I'd written. I had the documentation of every way I'd supported him from the shadows. I didn't need them to see it. I just needed to know it was true. That's the line. You can let people misunderstand you as long as you're not misunderstanding yourself. You can let them rewrite your role in their story as long as you're keeping an accurate record of the real story. But if you start to believe their version, if you start to lose track of who you actually are, that's when invisibility becomes erasure. That's when sacrifice becomes self-destruction. So I kept the records, not for them, for me, to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that the truth still existed somewhere, even if nobody else could see it. And that's what I recommend to anyone who's in a similar situation. If you're choosing invisibility, if you're letting someone believe something about you that isn't true, keep receipts, keep proof, not to weaponize later, not to shove in their face when you finally get tired of being misunderstood, but to anchor yourself, to remind yourself who you actually are when the weight of their misunderstanding starts to make you doubt. Fourth lesson, the ego wants vindication, love wants peace. This is the hardest one, the one I'm still learning.
Every year I was invisible. My ego screamed at me. It wanted vindication. It wanted to send proof to my son. It wanted to correct the record. It wanted everyone to know that I wasn't the villain, that I'd actually been the hero all along, that I'd sacrificed more than anyone knew. The ego wants credit. It wants to be seen. It wants everyone to understand how hard we've worked, how much we've given, how noble our intentions were. But love doesn't care about credit. Love cares about the other person's well-being. And sometimes their well-being depends on them never knowing how much you sacrificed. My son needed to believe he'd overcome his childhood on his own. He needed to believe he'd built his business through his own hard work. He needed to believe he was strong and capable and independent.
If I'd told him the truth, that I'd been secretly supporting him the whole time, it would have undermined all of that. It would have made him feel like his accomplishments weren't real, like he was still dependent on me, like he couldn't trust his own narrative. That would have been cruel. It would have been taking away his agency to satisfy my need for recognition. So I had to choose ego or love, vindication or peace. I chose peace. His peace, even though it meant my ego never got fed. And I'm not going to lie to you, that hurt. It still hurts. There's a part of me that wanted to walk into that courtroom like a conquering hero, that wanted to see the look on my daughter-in-law's face when she realized she'd been wrong about me, that wanted my son to fall over himself, apologizing for all the years he'd thought the worst. But that's ego. That's using truth as a weapon. And the moment you weaponize truth, you're not operating from love anymore. So when I walked into that courtroom, I had to keep reminding myself, this isn't about vindication. This is about clarifying assets so he doesn't get hurt financially. That's it. That's the mission. Everything else is ego noise. And when the truth came out anyway, not because I forced it, but because the circumstance required it, I had to resist the urge to expand on it, to make sure everyone understood just how much I'd sacrificed, to paint myself as the tragic hero. I kept my answers brief, factual. I let the judge add context if he wanted to, But I didn't perform my nobility. I didn't demand recognition because the goal was never recognition. The goal was my son's well-being. And if recognition happened as a side effect, fine. But it wasn't the point. Fifth lesson, truth has its own timeline. You can delay truth. You can redirect it. You can hide it in a fireproof safe and pray nobody ever asks for it. But you can't kill it. Truth doesn't die. It just waits. I thought I could keep the truth buried forever. I thought I'd die with it. And I'd made peace with that, or I thought I had. But truth doesn't ask permission. It comes when it comes. And when my ex-wife died, when the estate lawyers started pulling threads, when the legal system demanded documentation, truth said, okay, it's time now. I didn't get to choose the timing. I didn't get to prepare my son. I didn't get to stage a careful, gentle revelation where I controlled the narrative and made sure everyone understood before the facts came out. Truth just showed up and said, we're doing this now. And all I could do was stand in it, show up, answer the questions, let it unfold. Now that's the thing about truth. It has its own sense of when it's needed, and when that moment comes, you can either run from it or stand in it. Those are your only options. I chose to stand in it, not because I wanted to, but because running would have hurt my son more than standing would. And standing in truth after 30 years of living in silence, that's terrifying. Every instinct in me wanted to bolt, wanted to get in my car and drive away and disappear again. I'd gotten so good at invisibility, it was comfortable, safe. But safety wasn't the mission anymore. The mission was answering the legal questions so my son's financial future wouldn't be jeopardized. And that required me to be visible, so I surfaced. And it hurt. My God, it hurt. The light was too bright. The attention was too much. Every time someone looked at me, I wanted to crawl back into the dark. But I stood there and I let the truth do what truth does. I let it rewrite the narrative. I let it complicate the story my son had been living. I let it be messy and painful and confusing, because that's what truth is. It's not clean. It's not simple. It doesn't resolve everything neatly. It just is. And when truth surfaces after years of being hidden, all you can do is witness it. Let it happen. Don't try to control it or spin it or make it more palatable. Just let it be true. So those are the 5 lessons. Love is not always recognition. Sacrifice has intention. You can let people rewrite you without losing yourself. Ego wants vindication, but love wants peace too. And truth has its own timeline. Now let me give you some practices, some things you can actually do with this information, because philosophy is useless if it doesn't translate into action. Practice 1, the invisibility audit. Get a piece of paper or open a note on your phone and write down 3 ways you're currently invisible in your life. Maybe you're invisible at work, always doing the behind-the-scenes stuff, never getting credit. Maybe you're invisible in your family, the one who holds everything together but nobody notices. Maybe you're invisible to an ex or a child or a parent. They've written you off, made you the villain, and you've let them. Write down 3 ways you're invisible. And then for each one, ask yourself, am I choosing this or is this choosing me? Because there's a huge difference. If you're choosing invisibility, if you're consciously deciding that this person or this situation requires you to step back, that's strategy, that's sacrifice. But if invisibility is choosing you, if you're fading into the background because you're afraid or exhausted or you don't think you matter, that's surrender. That's erasure. Know which one you're doing. And then ask the second question. If I'm choosing this, what am I protecting? Them or me? Be honest. Brutally honest. Because most of the time when we think we're sacrificing for someone else, we're actually just hiding from our own fear. If you're invisible because someone you love genuinely needs you to step back, okay, that might be legitimate sacrifice, but you need to be sure. You need to know that your absence is serving them, not just serving your avoidance of discomfort.
Well, how do you know? Ask yourself, if they called right now and said they needed me, would I show up? If the answer is yes, if you're ready, if you're just waiting for the call, then you're probably sacrificing. If the answer is no, if you've convinced yourself you don't care, if you've moved on, if you couldn't show up even if they asked, then you're not sacrificing. You're just gone. And there's no judgment here. Sometimes people need to be gone. Sometimes relationships are toxic and distance is the only healthy option. But don't call that sacrifice. Call it self-preservation. Know what you're doing and why. Practice 2, the non-negotiable list. Make a list of 3 things about yourself that are non-negotiable. Core truths that don't change, no matter who's looking or what story they're telling about you. Not achievements, not roles.
Not things you do, but things you are. For me, they were: I am someone who keeps his word. I am someone who serves something bigger than himself. I am someone who loves beyond recognition. Those 3 things stayed true, even when everything else was stripped away. Even when I had no relationship with my son, no role as a father, no visibility in his life, I was still those 3 things. What are yours? What are the core truths that define you even when nobody's watching? Write them down. And when the world tries to rewrite you, when people try to tell you who you are or who you're not, look at that list. Ground yourself in it. You're not doing this for them. You're doing it for you. So you don't lose yourself in the invisibility. So you remember that just because someone can't see you doesn't mean you're not there. Practice 3. The letter you'll never send. This is the practice that saved me. Multiple times. Write a letter to the person who's most misunderstood you. Tell them everything. The truth they don't know, the sacrifice they haven't seen, the love they can't recognize. Don't hold back. Don't be diplomatic. Just write the raw, unfiltered truth, and then don't send it. Put it in a safe, or a file on your computer, or a journal you keep hidden somewhere secure, where you know it exists, but they'll never see it. The point isn't to make them understand. The point is to prove to yourself that the truth still exists, that you're not making it up, that you haven't gaslit yourself into believing their version of events. I wrote hundreds of these letters over 30 years, hundreds of "Dear son, here's what really happened. Dear son, here's what I've been doing while you thought I was gone. Dear son, here's how much I love you even though you'll never know." And I never sent a single one, but writing them kept me sane, kept me anchored, proved to me that the real story was still alive somewhere, even if only in my fireproof safe. Practice 4, the surfacing question. Once a month, ask yourself, is my invisibility still serving the person I'm protecting, or is it starting to hurt them? This is critical, because invisibility has a shelf life. It works for a season and then it stops working. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the moment when it shifts from protective to harmful. For me, that moment came when the estate questions arose, when my invisibility started creating legal confusion that could hurt my son financially. That's when I knew it was time to surface. But I might have missed it if I hadn't been asking the question regularly, if I'd just stayed on autopilot, assuming invisibility was always the right answer. So ask yourself monthly, is this still serving them, or is it just serving my fear of their reaction? Signs it's time to surface. When your absence creates more problems than it solves. When the lies built around your invisibility start collapsing on their own. When legal, medical, or practical realities demand your presence. When you realize you're not protecting them anymore, you're just protecting yourself from their pain. If any of those are true, it might be time to surface, not with vindication, not with "I told you so," but with clarity, with truth, with the information they need, even if it's hard to hear. And here's the mantra for that: I will surface when truth serves love more than silence does. Not a day before, not a day after. When truth serves love, that's when you break the silence. So let me bring this home. Let me tell you where I am now, a year after that courtroom. My son and I have had coffee 3 times. 3 times in 12 months. That's it. We're not close. We're not reconciled. We're just trying to figure out what comes next. The first coffee was awkward, painful. He asked questions. I answered them as honestly as I could, without drowning him in details I don't think he's ready for. He's still processing, still trying to reconcile the father he thought he had with the father he actually had. His wife hasn't spoken to me. I don't expect her to. She built her identity around rescuing him from his tragic past, and now that past is more complicated than she thought. That's hard for her. I get it. The second coffee was a little easier. We talked about his business, about the building. He asked if he could buy it from me at fair market value. I said no. I said it's his, always was. He just didn't know it. He didn't like that. Said it felt like charity. I told him it wasn't charity, it was back pay. For all the years I should have been there and wasn't. He didn't have a response to that. The third coffee, he told me about the accident. Said he'd started therapy again, started digging into the PTSD, started trying to understand why his brain works the way it does. Said his therapist suggested he talk to me, ask me what I remember from that day. I told him what I remembered. The drunk driver, the impact. The way his car seat had kept him perfectly safe while my side of the car crumpled like paper. The sound he made, not crying, just this quiet whimper that scared me more than screaming would have. He listened, didn't say much, just listened. At the end, he said, I don't know if I can forgive you for leaving. I said, I don't need you to forgive me. I need you to be okay. That's all I've ever needed. He nodded. Said he'd call me, and he did, 3 weeks later, for coffee number 4, which is happening next week. So that's where we are. It's slow, it's messy, it's nothing like the movies, but it's real, and real is all I've ever wanted. I don't know where this goes. I don't know if we'll ever have a real relationship. I don't know if he'll ever fully understand why I made the choices I made. I don't know if his wife will ever stop seeing me as the villain, but I know this. I loved him the best way I knew how. I sacrificed in ways nobody saw. And when truth demanded to be seen, I stood in it. That's all any of us can do. Love people with everything we have. Make the hard choices. Stand in the truth when it surfaces and let go of the outcome. Because you can't control whether people understand you. You can't control whether they forgive you. You can't control whether your sacrifice ever gets recognized. All you can control is whether you're operating from love or from ego, whether you're choosing invisibility for them or for you, whether you're willing to surface when the mission requires it. That's it. That's all you get to control. So here's what I want you to know. Here's what I need you to hear. You are not a villain for choosing distance when distance is what someone needs. You are not weak for letting people misunderstand you. You are not broken for carrying truths that no one else can see. You are a submarine in deep water, running silent, running deep. And someday, when the moment is right, you will surface, not because you need to, but because the mission requires it. Until then, stay true to what's non-negotiable. Hold the truth lightly, but don't erase it. And trust that love doesn't always look like presence. Sometimes it looks like the space you leave for someone else to grow. Sometimes it looks like walking into a courtroom 30 years later and letting your whole world crack open so theirs can heal. Sometimes it looks like being misunderstood for decades because being understood would hurt them more. That's love. The real kind, the kind that doesn't ask for credit, the kind that operates in the dark and calls it service. And if you're living that kind of love right now, if you're in the invisible middle of it, wondering if anyone will ever see, wondering if you're doing the right thing, I see you. I know what it costs. I know how heavy it is. And I'm telling you, keep going. The truth will surface when it's time. Your job isn't to force it. Your job is just to keep loving, keep sacrificing, keep standing guard from the distance they need. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not wrong. You're just a parent, a partner, a person who loved someone enough to let them rewrite the story. And that's not weakness, that's the strongest thing I've ever seen. So if this resonated with you,
If you've been carrying this kind of invisible love, just leave one word in the comments. Submarine. That's it. Just that word. So I know. So we know. So all of us running silent in deep water know we're not alone down here. And if you want more of these conversations, the kind that don't pretend love is simple, the kind that honor the cost of real sacrifice, subscribe, not because I need the numbers, but because these stories need to be told. And the people living them need to know they're not broken. They're just loving in ways the world doesn't have a category for yet. The truth has its own timeline. Community is something we can build right now. I'll see you in the next one.